Hello friends, welcome back to Spiritism for All, and today we will continue to study the book Behind the Scenes of Obsession, chapter Studying Hypnotism, by the spiritual author of Manoel Philomeno de Miranda and the medium Divaldo Pereira Franco. This video is very important and it will be a little bit long because it's a lecture provided by a high-level spirit called Irmão Glaucus, a specialist in hypnotism. So let's proceed to the book. We were informed by Brother Saturnino that in the process of this obsession, in which we were engaged alongside the Suarez family, it would be necessary to gather better lessons about the problem of spiritual hypnosis practiced by artistic avengers entities before we took detailed knowledge of the tasks that took place in the amphitheater. For that, we would receive at the first opportunity the visit of a wise spiritual messenger, Irmão Glaucus, who would come to our works and, using the mediumship of Brother Moraes, would give us an elucidating message about the hypnology. The amphitheater is the place where Dr. Theophrastus leaded an evil spirit from the dark side, and they would have this lecture about hypnosis in order to better understand what happens in the amphitheater. Having announced the night of the works in which we would receive the blessed instructor, we prepared ourselves conveniently, and when the time came, after the opening of the works, which was carried out by Brother Pichitinga and the normal instructions, the medium, in a somnambulistic trance, began to speak. After the initial and usual greetings, the entity, with radiated kindness and sympathy, began to express himself with an unforgettable inflection of voice. Brothers in restored faith, may Jesus, the divine benefactor, bless us and keep us, giving us his peace and inspiration. Since immemorial ages, some of the practices of modern hypnotism have been known, which occupied a prominent place in the religions of ancient people, although with different names. The pharaonic Egypt, through its priests, who researched the most variety of psychic phenomena with the resources they had at their disposal, dedicated several temples to deep study, in which hypnological experiments were carried out with expressive results. Chaldean magicians practiced it for the therapeutic purposes, achieving a respectable sum of benefits, and the various bibliographies referring to hypnology still preserve historical fragments of its centuries-old journey through countless civilizations that remained in the past. However, Frederico Antonio Mesmer was responsible for the great impulse that brought hypnotism to modern times. However, it's worth considering that Paracelsus, author of the concept and theory of fluid, had previously been interested in magnetic experiments, which would later be unfolded by Mesmer, developed by Mesmer. Mesmer considered the fluid to be the means of a mutual influence between the celestial bodies, the earth, and the stars, stating that his fluid This fluid is found everywhere and fills all empty spaces, possessing the property of receiving, propagating, and communicating all impressions of the movement. And he explained, the animal body experiences the effects of this agent, and it's by insinuating itself into the substance of the nerves that it affects them immediately. Graduated by the University of Vienna, the distinguished physician defended the thesis he titled Influence of the Stars in the Cure of Diseases, through which he exposed his fluids theory, inspired without a doubt by the traditional concept of universal fluidism. Fixed in such an opinion, he concluded that illnesses result from the absence of this fluid in the body, fluid that then becomes the soul of life. Using 27 propositions or aphorisms, he established the basis of his thought and moved from Vienna to Paris. And at the end of the 18th century, beginning despite the strong academic prejudice then prevailing to his practices, which had a certain burlesque character in view of the bizarre way in which he presented himself without the concern of attending to the seriousness of a scientific work. Understandably, the somewhat theatrical apparatus was able to influence patients who sought for help. Pausing as if to historically coordinate the concepts, he continued with expressive emphasis. Advancing from surprise to surprise in the magnetic experience alongside people with nervous disorders, Mesmer created the tub of convulsions, around which up to 130 people could be treated simultaneously. The note from the spiritual author is, the convulsions tube, or baquet in French, consisted of a large wooden box with giant dimensions, circular in shape, and filled with iron fillings. Bottles filled with magnetized water were placed over the fillings. These bottles resembled to communication vessels, in that they were interconnected and the liquid passed through them all, from the tub through asymmetrical openings came out countless slender, long and movable iron bars, which the patients applied to the diseased organs. Patients formed several rows around the baquet so that they could benefit from the magnetic results at the same time. In addition, they let themselves be tied to the waist by a rope and held hands in order to form a ring of strength in order to amplify the action of the fluid. There were gathered paralytics, neuropaths of a complex classification who, in contact with the magnetic fluid, were affected by violent convulsions, from which they left with relaxed nerves, freed from the disease that consumed them. Accepted by some, pursued by others, Mesmer ended up leaving Paris and moving to Nuremberg on Lake Constance, somewhat weakened and discredited. His experiences, however, caught the attention of illustrious men interested in the search for methods capable of alleviating human afflictions. Among these, the Marquis de Puysegur, in 1787, While magnetizing a peasant named Victor Reis, he was surprised by a strange occurrence. The patient fell asleep and in this state showed an admirable lucidity, being able to produce an efficient diagnosis of organic diseases that afflict him and to suggest a safe therapy. The Marquis de Puységur, dominated by humanitarian sentiments, magnetized a tree on his property in Buzancy with the aim of helping the poor who, touching the ancient plant, claimed to improve through its beneficial resources. Mesmer, in turn, interested likewise in the widest diffusion of magnetism, as well as in the gathering of spectacular results, instructed one of his employees, making him his co-worker in attending to his astonishingly growing clientele. In addition to the bouquet that served the collective number, there was the application of individual magnetism, done in a very crude way, but still with surprising results. His sleep state was mild, without confusions or torment, giving rise to the period then called somnambulism. The fact, worthy of study, suddenly became an instrument of Quakery and was called wonderful, giving rise to naturally ridiculous and undignified speculation. However, they were on the right path, despite of the false detours. The Academy, summoned to give its opinion through inquiries conducted in bad faith, came to the conclusion that it was all a hoax, and since then closed eyes and ears to the adventurers, relegating them to the greatest contempt. Conscientious researchers, however, were not discouraged, and among them Baron Dupotet and Carlos Lafontaine became more notorious due to the books they wrote and the public performances in which they performed, exhibiting the results of their investigations, although they were not really scientists. However, the discovery of De Puységur came to powerfully influence the Portuguese priest José Custódio de Faria, born in Concolin de Bardes in Portuguese Africa and residing in Paris, who, thanks to his remarkable work, came to be called in France l'Abbé de Faria, who managed, with unprecedented efforts, to free himself from all the practices and treatments used until then, establishing that the phenomenon proceeded from suggestion, evidently depending on the patients. He disregarded the ridiculous presentations without being able, however, to arouse the attention of academy scholars. De Puységur's experiences led the phenomenon to the field of transposition of the senses, vision at a distance and through opaque bodies, etc. However, the English surgeon James Braid is owed the introduction of the term hypnotism instead of magnetism, and new surprising conclusions in the research field, considering that he was a spiritualist. He attended a Lafontaine session to find out what was real in the debate problem of magnetization, when he was awakened to the more modest phenomenon, which led him to carry out countless experiments himself, in the course of which, after getting the provoked sleep in his subjects, he came across to the states of catalepsy and lethargy, finding a new field of valuable experimentation. So we were fascinated, the ones that were hearing the lecture. It was a historical synthesis of hypnotism, then applied in our spiritual works, and which today has a wide course among physicians and dentists, reflexologists, and psychiatrists, constituting a precious discipline who demands deeper and more complex studies. The instructor, after a slight reflection, continued the fluent and clear exposition. In 1878, however, Professor João Martinho Charcot gave a series of lectures at the Salpêtrière Hospital, producing in the Academy the rehabilitation of the despised magnetism, now presented with a different nomenclature, hypnotism, an expression more compatible, without a doubt, with the ongoing experiences. However, the eminent Professor Charcot, dealing exclusively with hysterics interned at the Salpêtrière Hospital, came to the hasty conclusion that hypnosis is a neuropathy which manifests itself in the patient through three distinct phases: catalepsy, lethargy, and somnambulism, relegating the hypnotic phenomenon to a level of discredit and even abjection. While Professor Charcot was pontificating at the University of Salpêtrière, accused by Professor Pedro Janet of having only hypnotized sensitives already conditioned by students who practiced somnambulism in the absence of the master, creating in the subjects a state of regrettable pathological automatism. It stands out at the Nancy School. Dr. Liebo, who since 1860 had applied hypnological resources daily in his clinic with expressive results, strongly disagreeing with the hysteria conceptualization of the Salpêtrière masters. This same Professor Pierre Janet had published in 1889 a book entitled Psychological Automatism, through which, among several conclusions, he tried to demoralize mediums, placing them among the hysterics in the condition of simple automatists. The School of Nancy brought together remarkable men, including Professor Bernheim, who had been attracted to hypnotism through one of his clients for whom all resources failed, and who had been cured with a single session of hypnosis at Dr. Liebo's clinic. Allan Kardec, the eminent codifier, stated that the effects of the fluidic action upon the ill are extremely varied, depending on the circumstances. This action is sometimes slow and requires a prolonged treatment, as in the case of ordinary magnetism. At other times, it's quick like an electric current. There are individuals endowed with a power such that they perform instantaneous healings on the ill simply by laying their hands on them, or even solely through an act of their will. Between the two poles of this faculty there are infinite variations. All healings of this kind are varieties of magnetism and differ only in intensity and speed of action. The principle is always the same. It is the fluid that performs the whole of therapeutic agents, and those effects depend on its quality and the particular circumstances. It comes from the book Genesis, Miracles and Predictions, from Allan Kardec, chapter 14, item 32. From the moment on, the two predominant currents of hypnology were definitively established, that the hypnotic phenomenon finds a better field and is specific in hysterics, and the other which states the opposite, establishing that people with normal brains are more able to concentrate in the ideas that are suggested to them, being more adequate to hypnosis. Different streams of thoughts patterned according to the multiple experimenters have been presented, creating odd and not infrequently ridiculous opinions. The truth, however, is that the two French schools, that of the Salpêtrière, in which they pontificated the concepts of hysteric neuropathies, and that of Dancy, affirming that legitimacy of suggestion in all individuals, deserved more extensive studies and better consideration from posterity, although the vast majority of researchers have disagreed with Charcot, Pedro Jouet, Babinski, its most illustrious representatives. Professor Carlos Richer, to whose work the physiological and psychological sciences owe so much, the eminent professor at the University of Paris carried out systematic studies, loyally espoused the results obtained, and managed to interest the most eminent scholars of his time, including the Professor Charcot himself, who, after the conclusions of the physiologist's master, decided to study hypnotism in depth. And giving a different inflection to the voice, the benefactor Glaucus, who aligned valuable knowledge and high-profile experiences, added, "What matters for us, however, is to consider the mechanism by which hypnological interventions are carried out between incarnate individuals and more particularly between discarnate and incarnate ones, in painfully obsessive processes as well as in the reciprocity of exchange between those who are stripped of carnal clothing, the discarnate ones." The mental waves externalized by the brain maintain a steady exchange in all quadrants of the earth and beyond. Thoughts act on unprepared men and women, and suggestion wins over antecedent positive or negative forces with which they tune into in lacerating unions, from which visions are born and permits of freedom arise, through which opinions, aspirations, yearnings transit. The concept of the Nazarene deserves to be remembered. Wherever the treasure is, there man will have his heart. Which is the same as to say that each being breathes the climate of the province in which it places the values that serve as a retentive in the here, or that constitute wings of release for the future. So, where is your center of attention that coordinates our thoughts, our desires, That's the point where our thought frequencies stands, and this frequency can be tuned to other brains, other discarnate or incarnate, and that reside your problem if your mental focus is not a good focus. If you are intending to do evil things, you will find other evil minds to help you. It is the same when you want to make good things, your mind gets tuned to other spirits, incarnated or not, that vibrate in the same frequency. Thought and will. These are the two levers of propulsion to infinity, and at the same time the two bonds of slavery in the unfortunate and pestilential strongholds of the hell of the passions. Thinking and acting, identifying himself with the factors of attention, constitute the magic formula of individual behavior at first and collective soon afterwards, in which sometimes by gregarious instinct, sometimes by psychic affinity, are gathered the companions of this or that idea. Heaven or hell, therefore, are dependencies that we build within ourselves, vitalized by aspirations, and maintained for a long time by the attitudes we imprint on our daily life. Through such processes, provinces of anguish and regions of torment, oases of bliss, and islands of hope are born in the depths of every mind, and are multiplied under countless wills that gather together in all departments of the planet. Initially, man becomes the angel or the devil, which he elaborates by virtue of the superior or addicted idea to which he is connected, turning in through a natural process of affinities with other incarnate or non-embodied minds, which vibrate in the same thought bands, producing processes of deep hypnosis that depersonalize and nourish themselves, sustained reciprocally by vital forces of ease, unconscious manipulation which gravitate everywhere. In this sense, it's convenient to consider the superior lessons of Spiritism, which offers a panorama of high mental and moral structure, providing records of superior ideas capable of maintaining a free psychic hygiene from any connection with the unfortunate entities of the lower spiritual world, or with the vibrations that hover in the earth itself, and that come from vigorous minds still in fetters, that magnetize one another, carrying out long-course harmful interchanges of unpredictable consequences. In any hypnological process, therefore, it's convenient to examine the issue of attunement and suggestion, with powerful reasons, which are essential for the achievement of objectives, the fixation of the invading idea. Professor José Grasset, for example, the excellent teacher of Montpellier, inspired by the observations made around the cerebral polygon that had also served as a basis for Wundt and Charcot, claimed to have discovered there the center of consciousness, the nucleus of the will, placing immediately below Broca's center, responsible for language function, and the ones responsible for sight, hearing, taste, etc. He imagined then a point of reference that became the center of the higher psyche, in charge of conscious phenomena, and in the polygon itself, the field of thought and will, responsible for all the tasks of for all the tasks of psychological automatism. Consequently, he elucidated that all suggestibility that emanates from the operator is unconsciously transmitted by taking possession of the cerebral field in the polygon of the hypnotized. The dominant will is responsible for guiding the dominated will, as if the soul of the one who hypnotizes momentarily replaced the soul of the one who was hypnotized. Thus, hypnotism can be called, as some experimenters want, the anesthetic of reason. On the other hand, the English psychologist Guilherme MacDougall, equally fascinated by this subject, asserted, examining the problem of suggestion in hypnosis, that this is a means of thought transmission, resulting in the convinced acceptance of any message proposed to the patient, regardless any analysis or logical examination for the acquiescence of the idea by him. That is, the operator imposes himself on the subject, who receives it without reaction from a previous examination. In good vernacular, suggestion is the act or effect of suggestion, of suggesting. Suggestion is the act or effect of suggesting, inspiration, encouragement, prompting, idea provoked in a person in a state of hypnosis or by simple telepathy. The suggestion is therefore the incident, constant inspiration, with which acts on the mind, causing acceptance and automatic obedience. For this reason, Forel informs that healthy brains are easier to accept the suggestion, and Emilio Coué, a disciple of Liebo, prefers to consider that patients capable of self-suggestion are better to interact with hypnosis, being able to produce more explicit and immediate results. Other authors, such as the famous Pavlov, the father of reflex in animals and in man, elucidated that natural hypnotic sleep and inhibition are the same thing, showing that when this inhibition becomes generalized, remaining the predominant cause, it tends to spread, enabling the hypnotized person to accept the predominant suggestion. It happens, however, that all beings have an ancestral, natural tendency towards obedience, which becomes an unconscious conditioning to accept any external order when there is no balanced and firm lucidity capable of neutralizing the external ideas that are suggested. In the hypnotic phenomenon, there is another factor of great value, which is perseverance, the constancy of the idea that's suggested in the person who receives it. Slowly at first, the penetration of the will begins, which, if continued, ends up dominating the one that is submitted to it. Modern psychoanalysts and reflexologists place their observations, the first in the conditioned reflexes, which claim to be a state of diffuse cortical somatic inhibition with the presence of a waking point, while the second refer to a particular regressive process that can be initiated by ideational sensory motor deprivation or by stimulating of an archaic relationship with the hypnotist. The concepts issued with wisdom and in a prodigious synthesis, considering the immense variety of opinions around hypnotism, dazzled us. What a strange and vast world of the mind! How many landscapes unknown to us! The very scholars of psychic phenomena on earth and beyond physical life were engaged for millennia, for a long time, in the elucidation of the throbbing questions of mental life, finding only now some vital points for elucidating the processes of exchange between man, discarnate spirits, and incarnate ones. I was drowned into considerations during the spontaneous pause when the unselfish entity continued. That said, my brothers, let us examine the problem of obsessions between the discarnate and incarnate in the physical sphere. In every process of mental magnetization, from which appears the simple obsession, fascination, and subjugation, according to Allan Kardec's perfect classification, there are always predisposing and preponderant factors that get lost in the intricacy of reincarnations. Every victim of today is the executioner of yesterday, taking his place in the cosmic concert. Thus considering, in almost all processes of madness, with the exception not only of organic cases of microbial attack on the brain, thus consider in almost all processes of madness, with the exception not only of organic cases of microbial attack on the brain mass, or trauma caused by shocks from blunt objects, we are faced with rigorous obsessions in which unbalanced love and devastating hatred are powerful acting agents. When there is an obsession process of this or that nature, the patient has psychic conditioning, unconscious memories, or the depth through which he/she is linked to the persecutor, which provides the attunement and acceptance of the suggested and constricted ideas that come from the spiritual sphere. If the patient is experienced in moral disciplines, despite the negative commitments he suffers from, he manages by conquering other merits, if not to offset the old debts, at least to raise resources to redeem them through processes other than obsession. The divine laws are of justice undoubtedly. However, they are also of love and mercy. The Lord does not want the offender's punishment. Rather, he wants his readjustment to order to duty for his own happiness. In this way, when the persecuting entity, consciously or not, is linked to the persecuted being, he obeys an automatic impulse of spiritual attunement through which he establishes the first psychic contacts in the center of the idea, initially in the cortical region and then in the recesses of the cerebral polygon, from where he commands the guidelines of psychic and organic life, producing there the lesions of this or that nature, whose reflexes appear in dystrophy and disarticulation of the organs linked to the attacked areas by the invading thought force. From this command center, in which the guest takes precedence over the host, mental alienations and organic disturbances spread over a long course which the deaf and the obsessed does not always interrupt. The guilty conscience is always an open door to the invasion of just or arbitrary penalty, and the remorse, which constitutes a hard key, allows the emergence of terrifying phantom ideas that give rise to the obsessive processes of debt redemption. Invariably, in obsession, there is always the use of the traumatizing idea, the presence of the crime committed, which is used by the mind that becomes a rival persecutor, hastening the deployment of depressing latency forces in the debtor, which, ungoverned, gravitate around those who elaborate the obsessive ideas, being consumed by them gradually. In the obsession activities between disembodied spirits, those executioners, aware of the limitations and errors of the newcomers from the carnal journey, after having accompanied them for years with implacable assassins, use ruses to frighten the unassisted, and through processes of suggestion applied with vehemence in their perispirit centers, they manage to produce regrettable conditionings of alterations in the shape of the victims that linger in their clutches, finally dominating them in a lengthy course of furious and devastating revenge. The shaped and brain-accepted ideas during the physical journey create the delicate panels of the perispirit, the most vitalized images that spiritual hypnotizers are used to recompose the terrifying pictures in whose meshes the unexpected is caught, slipping into the total psychic imbalance and allowing oneself to be covered by grotesque animal forms, which are already in the victim's own subconscious, and which wreak unhappy like the whip of justice in the need of corrective. In the opposite sense, the superior ideas fed by the spirit in a victorious excursion, conditioning him to liberation and granting a lighter specific weight to his perispirit, which can then free himself beyond and above the gross vicissitudes of the carnal bond. Very important informations. With great wisdom, Allan Kardec stated that, regarding the sensations that come from the external world, it can be said that the body receives the impression, the perispirit transmits it, and the spirit, which is the sensitive and intelligent being, receives it. When the act is initiated by the spirit, it can be said that the spirit wants it, the perispirit transmits it, and the body performs it, elucidating in an admirable synthesis the power of thought in organic life and sensations in the spirit. It's written at Posthumous Works, Allan Kardec, Spiritist Manifestations, Item 10, page 42. Ample silence spread through the room. We all immersed ourselves in meditations, while the angelic instructor provided the listeners with a pause for reflection. And as he made his calculations to finish the lecture, he concluded, "For this reason, the vitalization of edifying ideas builds the general sky of happiness, just as the depressing thinking generates the hell of affliction that starts to govern the behavior of the spirit. It's in this regard that Master Galileo's sovereign lessons stand out, urging man to adjust his life, respecting his blessed guidelines, through living with gentleness, compassion, mercy, and distinct love and incessant forgiveness." We revere today on earth, fortunately, Spiritism with Jesus, a true source of superior and ennobled ideas that free the spirit and lead it to the true causes in which his legitimate interests must reside, banishing doubts about what concerns to true life, and working against selfishness, the unfortunate factor of almost all the evils that afflict humanity. If someone makes a mistake, let him get out of the mistake and start the work of dignifying himself again. The error represents a lesson that cannot be a whip, but an opportunity to self-ennoblement by the opportunity it provides for repairment and remake. The permanent interchange between spirits of one or another sphere of objective life surely offers man the future vision of what is already reserved for him. However, to call oneself a Spiritist, it's not enough to have entered the Spiritist concepts or participated in some practical experiences of mediumship. It's essential to incorporate the teachings of the Spirit of Light into the way of life, take an active part in the journey of man's redemption in all ways and by all means available, so that the postulates of peace, justice, and love may triumph among all creatures. In this regard, love as bequeathed to us by Jesus Christ has the sublime strength capable of preserving us from ourselves, still journeymen of instinct, teaching us that happiness has its basis in renunciation and abnegation, providing us with a broader vision of responsibility and duty towards the future. One day will come, not far away, when pain will definitely withdraw, and the exchange of good by the creative force of love that originates in the mental dynamos of divine providence will vigorously involve all beings and lead them towards the direction of complete tranquility on whose path we are now. Let us trust, therefore, in the final victory of the good and immediately surrender ourselves to the supreme good that will take care of our own good. The spiritual friend ended his lecture. Soft vibrations, as if carried by invisible hands, invaded the room, and waves of immense tranquility overwhelmed us all, uttering expressions of affectionate farewell and leaving us with tears that flowed abundantly from the eyes. The venerable mentor disconnected from the medium, and the session was closed. A silence of indescribable emotions accompanied us all back home for the necessary rest, while the serene night chanted songs on stellar threads vibrating to infinity. My friends, this chapter, this video is of so much importance that we ask you, please see it again, see this video again, share with your friends. In the description of the video there's the link to download the translated book, so please study this chapter because it has so much information that is important for all Spiritism students and all the ones that search for the truth and for the good. Thank you very much for watching us. In next chapter, we will proceed with the spiritual saga, Valuable Elucidations. Thank you very much for watching us. If you like this video, please leave us your like, subscribe, share and leave us your comments. Thank you very much for watching us.